Mark, you've been super generous with your time. We could sit here and pick your brain for another 45 minutes, dude, and I don't want to
You're
do
welcome
that.
to. You're welcome
Yeah.
to. No, I'm free. I love the further we've got some of the questions you've had. I'll be honest, were some of my favorite because you really get into a lot of the process stuff, which is where I
Yeah.
really get
All right.
excited.
Well, I one of the things like I'm really interested in is if you're starting from if you want like do you have any good book recommendations for someone who wants to learn how to scout? Because
I'm gonna be honest.
I'll see the Bill Belichick's dad's books out there all the time. That's always like the number one book I see
Yeah.
recommended. But it is tougher than you think if you're like if you Google how to play, how to analyze the offensive line and you get 100 different things that are all completely different.
Yeah.
Like is there like in terms of that real process, like size, like different techniques, different like across the board, where I know the answer is probably just put in hours and hours and work your ass off and figure it out. I know that's the answer. But is there something where if you're just starting like to reference off of? So you sound like
That's
you know what you're talking about.
I know I get what you're saying. I'll be honest with you. My approach was just hours and hours and hours and literally
Yeah.
force yourself to learn it. So there, let me put it this way. For the first year and a half that I wrote scouting reports, I had very little football terminology. I was over here like, let me make sure I got the 5 tech labeled properly. Like that was the level, but I knew what I was looking at, but it wasn't necessarily like I could like label it in a way that a coach could, right? So
Right.
there's no substitution to just seeing it and really putting in the work. But I will say this, there's a lot of great resources out there. I know Inside the Pylon has a lot of old stuff that they use that I know a lot of people really like. Matt Waldman obviously is a great one. Waldman's an interesting one because you get a lot of very nuanced, very detailed stuff, but he gives you in a lot of ways that are understandable to a more casual fan. He's just a phenomenal writer in that way.
Mm.
He'll explain the most nuanced thing of like a running back's tempo and timing in a way that makes sense to someone who's never watched a running back before. Like,
Dude, he
so
did a Nick Chubb video last season, and I watched the Browns the next week, and I was like, wow, I'm seeing like I saw like a whole different
it's a different game with
level.
Waldman.
Yeah.
It's so many layers to it, and Waldman goes all the way down through them,
Yeah.
and it teaches you the game in a very unique way. My thing is this is you want to make sure, in my opinion, you're doing it your way to an extent, right? So like you're gonna learn things along the way. You're gonna have people who say, hey, maybe you didn't see it this way. Like, and that's not in like you don't know what you're looking at way, but like look at it from this perspective. Waldman is very good about that. There's a lot of great resources out there, but ultimately where you're going to learn the most is just doing it, where you're going to get comfortable and where you're going to really understand things, because there's no substitution to watching 10 guys and saying, okay, well, what made these 10 guys tick? Like, what did I see with them? What are my notes on them? If I missed on them, well, why did I miss? I can go back through all my old misses, and there's a lot of big ones. Like I had Kurt Benkert QB1 going way back when I first started, and I can tell you exactly why. I can pinpoint the throw that happened against Boise State where he threw it 45 yards downfield to the left side of the field, and it was just a perfect throw, and I was a little bit too tired watching him, so that was an impact. And he had a few splash plays that were really nice, so that made me skew my opinion. You can go back to when you start missing on guys, and it's going to happen. There's no avoiding that when you get into this. You're going to go to guys you missed on and say, okay, why did I miss on him? And because you did the work, you're going to understand why you missed on him, and that's going to build your knowledge. And I think that's a lot, in my opinion, more of a natural thing and a more comfortable thing to do than just taking stuff you learn from other people, because it's one thing to listen and learn. It's another thing to see it and really understand it from your own eyes. And I think that's where most of your knowledge is going to come from over time.
What type of access to resources do you have now at Sports Illustrated that you didn't have on your own show?
I got that mafia stuff. I'll say that.
Mafia stuff helps.
Yeah, and that's
So what about access to players, like interviews? I mean, I'm assuming you throw Sports Illustrated around, like talking to guys is probably a little easier, no?
No, I don't. I'll be honest. I mean, I talked about when we started the show. You could bring me in as NFL Draft Bible. Like that's just as strong of a name to me as SI. And personally, like SI obviously has a lot of power in terms of name recognition. People see that and go, "Wow, SI." It's like at the end of the day, I'm doing the same stuff I did with What's on Draft, right? Like I'm still watching players. I'm still evaluating. That's what I do, regardless of the title. I mean, it is what it is. We have a lot more accessibility to getting interviews with players, and I imagine we're going to have some more perks that come with that type of backing that SI has. But ultimately my thing is, do I have the tape? Am I able to watch players and put in my reports? Do I have the tools I need to effectively evaluate players? Ultimately, that's what I'm concerned about. So if I have that, then I'm happy with it. And they do a pretty good job of providing us that.
That's great. That's great.
Awesome stuff right there, Mark. One of my questions before we head on out.
Keep them coming. I'm loving it.
Is okay. So
test us.
Right now we're living in the analytical age where everything is kind of being thrown around with numbers. You have Pro Football Focus, you have a lot of these analytical stuff. So I know you talked about your inherent biases as far as not watching games and just kind of breaking down your players before you watch film or whatever like that. So do you buy into the analytics a little or not at all?
I think there's value in it. The question is, what do you find in it that is most valuable? How can you apply that because I'll be honest, like evaluating players is the most subjective thing I can think of in life. Like it's just what you see. Everyone's going to have a different opinion on it. So, and there's these sources, like these resources, PFF grades and stuff like that. They provide context, but they're provided in a way that they're going to provide the data, right? But you can interpret that subjectively in a lot of different ways. You can say, oh, well, this guy moved around a bunch of different spots. Well, some people are going to take that information if he played, 30% of it, like a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, right? He played like 30% of his snaps in the slot and then 30% on the line and 30% is a traditional outside linebacker, whatever. Like he played all over the place. Some people are going to take that information and say, oh, well, yeah, so this shows that he's versatile and he can play a lot of spots. Some people are going to say, this shows he doesn't have a true home. We don't know where to put him. You can take that information and use it in a lot of different ways. I haven't done the work with it that I need to have a very strong opinion on analytics. It's something that I'm not comfortable with personally to where I'd want to implement it a bunch into my work. If I was with a team, I'd hire some real smart people to figure it out and help put that into our package. Because the more information you have, the better. The more you can use and implement into your process, the better. But it's something that I haven't reached a point where I'm knowledgeable enough and comfortable enough with it to where I can use that information effectively. But that said, I know NFL teams have a lot more at their disposal. They have a lot more guys who can turn all the fancy numbers that make a lot of sense to them into, I'm a caveman. They can give it to me in a way that I understand it. So that's the thing is you got to find people who can take the information, interpret it, and provide it to you in a way that's understandable to you, where maybe you don't understand it as well. But ultimately, it all comes down to how are we going to blend this together into the most complete, as it's subjective still, but the best result we can get in the best evaluation process that we can get.
How many hours per day are you watching film?
It depends. It really does. Some
every
days,
day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest with you. I kind of get. I don't want to say sick if I don't watch tape, but like if I go, I can take a day off, right? Like everyone takes a day off here and there, but there's never a day that goes by that I'm not thinking draft. There's never a day that goes by where I'm like, I don't want to at least get like one player watched, Some days I'll sit down and spend, 12 to 15 hours watching guys, and that's all I do all day. And then there are some days where I'll watch, two guys, maybe spend a few hours editing the database, do 5-6 hours, and then, hang out with the family for the rest of the time. So, but it's something that like, it's a constant,
It's dedication.
There's no dedication when you love something that much, right? Like
That's awesome.
it is what it is. Because if I wasn't doing it for a living, what I want to do with all my free time that I wasn't working on something else, I'd want to be doing this because I love it, So it's people talk about it like it's a big dedication thing. Well, if you get to watch 15 hours a day of football, you jump on that opportunity if it presented itself,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
If you're doing that in a heartbeat, that's a lot of fun, man. But what was the position that took you the longest to learn?
I'm still really struggling with cornerbacks. Cornerbacks and safeties are tough for me because broadcast tape, it's very tough to know just kind of the play speed that these guys have because you're not always seeing them. A lot of times when you see them, it's, a safety's coming downhill and he's already built up his speed for 15 yards. So that's one it's tough for me because I don't have as much experience because the tape I was watching before I got my hands on some of the mafia stuff. And just in general, you don't get as many teaching reps, right? So like, in my opinion, when you watch tape, you're looking for reps that tell you something about that player. There are a lot of reps that are just dead reps. Like if a quarterback is just, he takes the ball and he just hands it off real quick and there's nothing you learn about And obviously there's some small things you can pick up on how he hands off the ball, his ability to handle snaps. But like in terms of like teaching moments, there's not much you can learn on that. Or like a linebacker who's just sitting in zone coverage and like nobody's around him, he just kind of stands there. You don't learn anything on that. But with cornerbacks and stuff, there are a lot of reps where like ball skills, for instance, you rarely see cornerbacks ball skills. Maybe a guy only gets targeted 2-3 times a game, and then that's when you see the hand-eye coordination, the ability to track the ball in the air. There's a lot of reps that are dead reps with safeties and corners where you might have to have a safety playing deep downfield, and it's a run up the gut 3 plays in a row. You're facing a run heavy team, and he just doesn't do anything for 3 plays. Well, we didn't gain anything out of that. So it's
you watching more games on those guys than you would like an offensive or defensive lineman?
Yeah, and ultimately my rule with how many games I watch on a guy is how many questions do I have left, and am I comfortable with the guy, right? Like that's ultimately when I feel comfortable with like putting in my report is, did I get enough to where I've answered all the questions I have? I have a good feel of him as an athlete. Is he agile? Is he, explosive in a straight line? If a guy is a safety or cornerback, I want to see something with the ball skills. I want to see, does he track it effectively downfield? What's his technique like? I want to get a feel of everything the guy does. And once I feel like I've got a feel for that, then I'll say, okay, yeah. Some guys, I don't get a good feel until 7-8 games. It's rare that happens. Usually get a good feel after a couple games, and then you finish out 3-4 games total just to make sure you do it right. But you usually can get a good feel on a guy after about 2-3 games, and then.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
off.
Oh,
you're fine. You're fine.
Are you more fluid with your analysis, or do you have? It sounds like you almost have like a set of requirements for each position that you're looking at. Like go through here, check. Go through there, check.
There are different schools of thought with that in a lot of ways. I know some people say you want to have something on every little aspect of his game. There are some, like with linebackers, for instance, I know with our grading scale that we're going to have for next year for Draft 5, and I don't want to go too in detail because they haven't divulged that publicly a ton yet, but like, for instance, linebacker with hands, right? So like a linebacker, you're not going to see a ton of reps of a linebacker playing at the catch point. So it's not something that's going to be very valuable. Now, do you want to see it? Do you want to get a feel for it? Do you want to be able to put a number on that of, is it good, bad, whatever? Yes. But I'm not going to kill a linebacker because I didn't see him at the catch point over 6 games, right? So, but I want to have a very good, like I said, I want to answer all the questions I have. If I have a question about, is this guy's burst, does he look like a 4.5 or a 4.6 guy when he's trying to close and really, explode to the point? If I'm watching a cornerback, does he have good hip fluidity? Is he a guy who's able to, if he's working in zone, can he explode to the point and really impact the catch point? There's things like that where you've got to have enough of a read on a guy to where you say, I can tell you exactly what type of athlete he is. I can tell you the technical things about him. I can tell you about some of his mental game, and I can tell you what he is. And if I can't tell you very comfortably, this is what this guy is, this is what I project him to be, whether it's a starter or a backup, then I have too many questions left and I need to continue to watch. Which sure, some people go overboard and watch, a full season on a guy, and it's like, oh, at a certain point there are marginal returns, right? So like the diminishing returns of like, okay, an extra, a 9th game might not tell you that much on a guy, but that 2nd and 3rd game is really going to tell you a lot. So it's subjective for each player, right? Like some players you're going to get a lot on in a few games. Some players you're going to like a Trey Sermon. You can tell Trey Sermon's got great contact balance and he's powerful after 1 game, and it pops off the tape. But maybe you don't see as much from him as a pass catcher. So you got to watch more to see, okay, what's he doing on these reps, or he's either, catching passes or pass blocking. So it's just about finding, like I said, those teaching reps. You might have only 3-4 in a game for a certain guy, and then 25 in another, for another guy in the same game. So you just got to take what you can out of those reps that teach you stuff on players.
All right, this is my last question here. Talking to other scouts, good thing or bad thing, and do you do it a lot? Does it turn more into arguments?
I'll say this.
Or does it bias you? Do you purposely not do it to bias you, not bias you or something?
I'm very bad about getting on Twitter. I'll say that. I'll just pull it up and click and see what's going on Twitter all the time.
You're active on there, yeah.
But I try to turn on blinders, right? And you always want to have blinders on until you put in your report, because you don't ever want to go in seeing, okay, this is what so-and-so thought on, like with Chris Sims, we talked about really early on here. I don't want to go into Kellen Mond's evaluation thinking about Chris Sims had Kellen Mond over Justin Fields. I don't want to go into an evaluation saying, well, this guy told me he's good. He told, this guy does this, this, and that well, put him on your radar. Because if I know that, then I'm going to go into that looking for those things.
Mhm.
NFL teams do this with the national and Blesto combines, these scouts where they take the grades from the guys from the year before, the juniors that they watched, and then, cycle it over. When they give those scouts that list, they're not giving a lot of them. They're not giving the grades. They're just giving the names, because they don't want these guys to think, well, the national scout force graded this guy as a first rounder. They don't want them to know that. They want them to go and
explain National Blesto to our audience, because I bet you a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. So National Blesto is a really fun one, and this is something I learned, I think, about a year and a half ago, and it's one of the coolest things about how teams approach it is, so not every team does it. There are, I think, like 5 teams that aren't in this, but there's 2 groups, National and Blesto, that are, I think they call them just scouting combines, which they have, each team gives a member pretty much of like, this is our Blesto scout, or this is our national scout. And these guys, when it's in the spring and all these pro days are going on, they're doing the juniors for next year. So this year, for instance, who's a good junior went back? So Chris Olave, right? So Chris Olave went back to Ohio State. Those guys right now are watching Chris Olave and writing him up and plugging him in for next year. So they have information. Maybe it's pro day numbers on him. Maybe it's the background a little bit, some of the medical maybe, and just generally like just basically a preview report, like an advanced report on this guy. And so teams will do that. So they have information on going into next year. Who are the guys we need to look out for? When we send our scout into Ohio State, here's the list of players that they're watching for. And that just gives them some stuff to work on, a baseline, so they're not going in there completely blind. But to circle back around to what I was kind of getting at there with that is that teams don't want their scouts to have a bias on a guy, right? They don't want to think this guy going in is a first rounder. There's a defensive end / outside linebacker. I don't want to say the guy's name because I wasn't a big fan of him this year, who got first, second round hype in the summer. And I watched him. I'm like, this guy's a UDFA. I don't see it with him. You've got to make sure every time you enter an evaluation, you're not thinking about what did so-and-so think on this guy, or what is the room temperature on this guy. You want to make sure you're giving him the grade that you feel comfortable with. And that's really where it's going to be important. So to continue to touch on this, sorry, it's a long
No, it's perfect. It's super great answer. Keep going.
But I will say this is this is why I'm so big in talking process, right?
Yeah.
Because you can talk process. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter what time of year it is. I can talk with a fellow evaluator and say, okay, well, how many games do you usually watch? Or what's your process? Are you an early note taker? Or do you like to get a game to kind of feel it out and then you take your notes? Are you a guy who writes a bunch of notes, or a guy who's kind of not, taking a bunch of notes? Are you a rewinder? This is something that doesn't get talked about enough, is you have some guys like myself who rewind a play 10, 15 times if I need to, because I need to get everything. If I can't get a read on this guy's burst, I'll watch until I do. If I'm trying to read, how quick did this corner close? I watch until I feel confident. This is how quick he closed. And there are some people who it's more about, okay, let me just scoot through these games real quick, and I'll see enough reps of this guy doing this to where I can pick it out and feel comfortable over seeing 7 reps of him closing rather than the 1 rep really, really confident, right? There's a lot of nuanced things like that you can talk about process-wise with other scouts in season. But in terms of I'm not asking someone about what's your thoughts on Patrick Jones or this and that until I've turned in my report. And I try to avoid always telling people hey, this is my thoughts on this guy. If you ask me, I'll tell you, but I'm not going out of my way to tell you. I'll say, hey man, you should check this guy out. He's on my radar. I had some interest in him, but I'm not going to tell you this is what I thought on this guy. I'm not going to give you a breakdown, because that's up to you as an evaluator to go in there and do your own work and come to your own conclusions on that player.